Better.
Good morning, one and all here now. It is Sunday, the 14th. We're having our weekly discussion and got started a little bit early with Anthony and talking about principles and refocusing on principles in the midst of the potential to constantly reinforce stories, which is I would say
waste of time.
One is going to reinforce a story that constantly becomes developed and developed and developed. Actually, it becomes like a script that gives a sense of a narrative in our brains to give us the idea that because we've developed this script and there seem to be so many characters acting in the play that we've created, it's real and true, when in fact the truth is that the cause of that creates shame and embarrassment and guilt and contempt, because it feels all of a sudden as though we, as the creators of reality, have a reality we can't seem to stop catering to or thinking about. And principles are not created in thought. They simply exist. They're the basis of existence. They are almost like the elements are in terms of the chemical makeup of every element in the universe. The principles are the unseen, indivisible makeup of how things work. They function. Things function properly when they're addressed correctly, when they're treated correctly, when they're expressed correctly. They just function naturally. And like math, as Anthony was talking about, if you add 2 + 2 and get 4, you will get it every time if you actually perform the operations correctly, in order. So the disorder of thinking is making believe that who I am is what I think. And that's always based on what I think is reality and truth, meaning I'm always primed for a fight if someone else doesn't think like I do, because the defensive nature of something that isn't true being thought of as being true creates a defense. It creates reactiveness. It creates fear, because it's naturally, we know better than to think all we are is what we think, and as a result, all we think is all that is. So beginning to notice that and beginning to talk on those terms and beginning to look at principles, nothing I can say will ever get through anybody unwilling and uninterested in hearing. And nothing that can be said by anyone. I'm not singling myself out as someone who says the right thing all the time, because I'm learning every day. But nobody will entertain a thought that won't be reinterpreted by an obsessive thought they're thinking. So all they really ever hear is what they're thinking someone is saying, or what they're thinking what is being heard, rather than starting to actually open their ears and actually say, let me just sit for a minute and try and hear the words that are being spoken. And I would say the game of telephone is a very good example of how short our capacity to remember a simple sentence is in our own experience. It's almost impossible to play telephone and have the third person repeat the sentence that was originally said. And by the end of 5 or 6 people, it's so far off the case that imagine that looping game in our own head, trying to make believe we understand what people said when we never heard what they said to begin with, and then try to constantly recreate it so we can understand them, when in fact we don't even understand what we've heard in our own experience. It becomes a very divisive approach to relationships, and certainly unhealthy. Codependency would reflect that, and manic depressive sort of behaviors where everything always seems to be all right and then everything always seems to be bad. Sort of those extreme mood swings that are so easy once everything is perfect, seems perfect. It makes anything that doesn't seem perfect all of a sudden become like a torpedo, completely sinking the ship, and all of a sudden we're damned again and forced to that other side. And it's all self-created, all self-perpetuated. It's a pendulum that we think we can maintain the movement of when it's always moving. We're at sea. We think we're on land. We're actually at sea in terms of our inner landscape and the movement that we're able to create in our own emotional experience, which is another form of motion. So the question is, are we at peace? Are we witnessing the great ease that comes with that sense of knowing? Or are we witnessing the conflicted nature of thoughts constantly trying to figure thoughts out? And the self we call ourself is really just thoughts thinking of themselves. And those are maintained and managed by us. We each choose to do that. This isn't something imposed on us. And it only feels imposed on us when we think it's truth and reality we're struggling with, and we can't seem to get it right because it never feels right. And the reason it doesn't feel right is because it's wrong to make believe thoughts are, in fact, the creator of reality and truth, rather than a byproduct of it, designed to express it and to share it and to cooperate as a result of it, inclusively with everyone. That's what integrity is about, the principle for the fifth step, being in the fifth month. So I go loop around that same conversation, and engaging around it in a conversation will shift from the storytelling and the reinforcing of the reason why all the time, because why is always a question. If you start asking questions all the time, all you're going to be in is doubt. And if you start noticing that what's happening is happening, it's a way to reassure the fact of what's happening. And that something's happening is pretty easy to conclude, since everything that's happening is always happening. So that it's happening is the start point of starting to speak in terms that are assured and stable and not doubtful and uncertain and in conflict. Just noticing that what's happening is happening. And whether I think I should be doing it or think I shouldn't be doing it is irrelevant, except to the idea that I should constantly be in doubt and crippled by this caustic, addictive, repetitious, vicious cycle of thinking about itself, thinking someday I'll figure it all out, while I will assure you it is already figured out right now. If there's anything to figure out, it's been figured out, and it's been working perfectly the whole time. We've been imagining it was up to thinking to conclude it correctly before we could actually concede it. We can concede it now because it already exists perfectly. And to do that is the beginning of speaking in terms that will not instigate more obsessive thoughts. Anthony, why don't you share what you shared with me when you came in today?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I was talking about, I kind of had a breakthrough why, if you're continually getting better, why sometimes you would feel worse. And so the getting better comes from getting rid of some of the defense mechanisms that work so well. The lying, rationalizing, minimizing. So you get rid of those, and that's good. You're making progress. But then all of a sudden, with the double-edged sword, now you lost your quiver, and you're open to a lot more wounds, so to speak.
Well, and I would suggest you're never going to get rid of them, but when you start seeing them for what they are, it's kind of like seeing the wrench you keep picking up for a bolt that it doesn't fit and wondering why things are complicated. And it's not that the possibility of them isn't going to go away. Because it's one of the possibilities we have, first of all, is to express all possibilities, but also think that something impossible is possible. That's a freedom we have. And that would be a loving source, in my estimation, to give us so much freedom to recognize our capacity to be responsible and to function functionally and healthy, sanely. That's a recognition of that capacity. We're not condemned to not do those things by a source that says, well, I can't even let you do this because you're going to kill yourself and you're going to create all this mayhem. That would be a source that would be afraid of our potential to recover from those things, rather than see it's just a choice we make. It's nothing more than that. And we each have that choice to choose whether we're going to grow or shrink, whether we're going to open up or close down and shut down. So if I'm thinking obsessive thoughts, I'm going to react obsessively to what people say, because all I'm going to hear them say are things that either attack my thoughts or things that I think have them, to Jana's point very often, become this co-conspirator that says something close enough for me to think is like what I'm thinking. And I think they're my friend because they're not attacking me and they don't seem to be an enemy, when in fact the relationship is built on a lie. And it's not going to work. It's only going to give me the same impression, Anthony, you had, that you were getting better when you were trying to overcome those things. You're starting to see now those things you thought you were getting better than are absolutely and have been there the whole time. You simply haven't been feeling them.
Yeah.
And so the experience is a little disturbing at first. And I would say to expand that to the world is to look out there and say, you know what? There's probably a lot to do in this world. And it helps me see my fallacies and my shortcomings when I think in those terms, rather than simply think, what can I do for myself to secure the self that I thought I was figuring everything out for a lifetime, rather than say, there is no self to do anything for. I've already been given everything. Why don't I think of everything in relation to everything, rather than some things as a priority against other things? Doesn't mean I have to act in a way that I become all consumed with trying to do everything for everyone, but I can become aware of the fact that everyone else has this sanity. Everyone else has this same elementary basis of existence. And if I begin to see them that way, I begin to provide, rather than a reactive energy in the universe, I begin to provide a little bit of room for people to say, oh, I can do that too. I can function that way. I don't have to tell them, for them to recognize it when they're not in the face of so much anxiety and stress being caused by so much going on around them they can't make sense of. The more reactivity I perpetuate, the more people are caustic. And the less I perpetuate, the better the chance they start looking accurately about what's going on. And if that's true for all of us, then the better we talk about this collectively, the better the chance we create space for people around us that will all of a sudden do things we never would have expected them to do, because we were sure they would only do the worst thing we could imagine. And that's all we imagined being possible, which is pretty common.
Can I ask Anthony to repeat the question? Because I think I have a...
Speak up a little bit, Santiago.
Yes, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Can I ask Anthony to repeat the question, please?
The question was, why, if I'm going through these lessons, so to speak, and learning more and getting better, am I feeling worse sometimes? Why am I feeling weaker, like more susceptible to things? Little things could bother me, even though I'm spending all this time working on myself.
But I think it's like, if I ask myself, why, if I am doing things right, today is raining? Or why is sunny today? Why is windy today? Because thoughts and feelings look to me that they just happen. It's things that happen to you. The thing is how you deal with them. And then we have this other, or I think we have this other component that we carry this duality in ourselves. In one hand, we have the capacity to be conscious and understanding that it's all one. And at the same time, we are separated because we have chosen to experience life in that separation. So depends what is dominant in you when something happens, being a good day or a bad day, depends where you are in that, where I am in that duality of consciousness or separation, that I take whatever happens, being a feeling or being the weather, in one way or another. I don't know if I am saying this correctly, but that's my 2 cents.
Anthony?
Well, so here's the theory that's kind of what I was thinking too. But then a little while ago, I thought, you know what it is? I think what it is me getting better is starting to understand that I'm doing certain things, using certain, what are they called? I guess character defects, but I'll rationalize. I'll tell myself a lie. I'll lie to myself, that I can have one more, whatever it is, cupcake. And I take away all my defenses. Now I'm not lying. I'm not rationalizing as much. I'm not minimizing. I'm looking at the truth. I'm realizing I don't need to do other things. So I'm stripped down of everything. If everything is right, I should be stripped down of no ego. I got no no thick skin anymore, basically. So that's why I feel weaker sometimes, I think, even though I'm getting better.
You're vulnerable and you're recognizing your responsibility, and that's probably a little bit of shame creeping in.
And that's where like somebody from my dad's generation would never want to go to that level, right? Because just like why would you ever show, from being from New York too, right? You would never want to show your underbelly to somebody and say, let me tell you what's really going on here. Here's my weakness. In fact, that's one of the things they say you're never supposed to do, is tell people your weaknesses, because then they use it against you.
Well, we don't have to broadcast to everyone anything that we're doing or thinking.
They know it anyway. They can tell when you're lying.
But the bigger issue is that what we're talking about here is a start point in our own experience, which we seem to have an ongoing conversation in our head as though there's someone to have a conversation with.
Yeah.
Which drives us mad to a degree, because we're constantly trying to have that conversation get to the point where things are finally worked out, when the basis of the conversation is just misuse of thought. But my sense is, Anthony, that in the sick thinking, we thought the goal of life was overcoming feelings so we feel better all the time. And when you begin to see that getting better actually means getting better at feeling what's happening because it aligns, you start noticing that whatever's happening is simply happening and there's no argument in it. It may not feel great, but it doesn't feel any worse than the idea that it shouldn't be happening and setting off on that tirade of thinking that every moment you live, you need to resist it in some way and overcome it, which is ultimately this obsessive pattern of thinking that just wears us out in years and days, and all of our capacity in our days wears our life out quicker than it would otherwise wear.
I guess it must be wrong about half the time, right? You're not always, all your thoughts aren't always right. So you got to be wrong at least, 30% of the time or whatever it is. That's a lot of being wrong.
I would say I'm wrong 90% of the time.
Yeah, I was trying to be.
Even greater. My first impulse is generally protective of something I'm thinking. It's not about what's happening. And to Santiago's point, we think these things are happening to us, but I would suggest they're actually being caused by us at the same level. We don't think we're doing what we're doing to think that we can stop doing what we're doing by thinking we shouldn't be doing it. I mean, think of this. We think we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, right? That means that we're trying not to pay attention to what's happening, but what we think is happening. And if I'm always thinking about my thinking as being the creator of what's happening, then I think when thoughts occur to me, I have nothing to do with them. But I assure you, if I didn't have a body and a brain, they wouldn't occur. And they are occurring directly as a result of my body and brain. So somewhere in there, in that pressure cooker I've created, I am coming up with these things to almost insist I then do the things I think are the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. And it just creates this mirage of an oasis in the future somewhere else.
Is it bad if I'm actually taking notes and writing down the things this voice is telling me?
When I started seeing this, that's exactly what I did, Anthony. And when I began to listen to the voice and write down the things it was saying, it went from saying all sorts of nice things to being filled with hateful, loathsome, spiteful, contemptful commentary. You're such an idiot. What the fuck are you doing? What is wrong with you? All that stuff was under there, and I was pretending I was happy and fine because I was bearing this toxicity. And what I learned about writing is that it gave my thoughts a place to live where I didn't have to maintain them because I'd keep them still on a piece of paper somewhere.
Yeah.
And I knew all of a sudden that I could have a little break and reprieve from that constant thinking. I thought if I didn't keep thinking about it, they'd disappear, and I was right. And isn't it interesting that people who are in misery and depression praying to get out of it continue thinking the thing that's continuing to create it and wonder why it continues? It's crazy. It's absolutely repetitious and crazy.
What do you think about that theory, Santiago? About by eliminating your defense mechanisms, you can feel more vulnerable sometimes.
I think I agree with Jack that the thoughts don't happen without my participation, but it feels that I am not participating because they just happen.
Yes.
So what I was referring is to that. But yes, I agree with Jack that they are happening because inside I am creating them.
And what's interesting about it, Santiago, is that the argument that we have nothing to do with it is an argument that we don't exist. That's a suicidal thought. We're trying to argue for the fact that because we don't think we're doing it, we're not doing it, which is to try to claim to be irresponsible for what we're doing. And if as that's looked at, you begin to come to terms with it, it's easy. Like in the looking at principles, Anthony, we don't have to see the principles. We don't have to know the names of them to think of principles as being something that's always available, that is our ever-present basis for existence, that they, in a human form and in this universe, they've always been working the same way. They've always been working. They've always been functioning. And for me to think I need to figure them out is to think that because I don't understand them right now, I'm not utilizing them. When in fact, to even have this conversation is the utilization of everything that's happening for us to even be here and listen and hear and talk and think and do any of the things we're doing. It actually confirms them. It doesn't disqualify them. But Santiago, you're on the button. When I'm ashamed of the thoughts, I very conveniently think I didn't have anything to do with this. This is happening to me. All of a sudden, my thoughts, as though they have their own body and their own brain and their own volition, something I've been given the freedom to have thoughts and choose what they do. And then I all of a sudden make believe they're acting in spite of me, to spite me and condemn me. That's an interesting leap. But it's an easy thing to do. And I do that probably as regularly as I do anything every day. My first thought is often not right. And so it takes a moment just to sit and watch and notice what's going on and notice what I'm reacting to and what's going on. Very often the people around me are giving me a chance to see the thoughts I don't think I'm having by the reactions that are created, the instigations that I think I need to all of a sudden come to the rescue of. What am I rescuing? A thought that's sick. What am I going to rush it to the hospital and hope it gets well? Or just notice it. If I'm honest about it and I notice it, it dissipates. It doesn't have any basis other than my thinking about it. To defend it and think my reactivity about it is going to save it somehow, is to maintain it in a way that I keep thinking is happening. Again, that same thinking, it's happening to me. This can't be caused by me. The shame and guilt of doing this for so long becomes so obvious that it becomes laughable rather than something we want to kill ourselves over. And I think you made that point earlier too, Anthony, that as you started noticing that, you started laughing at those things.
Yeah.
And I would say those were often the things that were really the source of your crying and your misery and the sort of shame that you kept to yourself and never admitted. Any feedback on that, Anthony?
I think
It sounded good, except for that last sentence. It didn't really.
I think that the more that I practice these principles in my affairs, in my thinking, the more I practice honesty, the more obvious dishonesty becomes.
Yes.
Both in my own thinking and as I observe the actions and discussions of others. The more that I practice brotherly love to my fellow travelers, the more obvious becomes hate and spite and all those other anti-brotherly love actions. And so it's kind of like it's all thinking, kind of like pure water and a liquid dye are both liquids. But if I have a pool of clear water and I pour the dye in it, the whole entire pool will turn some shade of that that color. So if I'm trying to live a life of honesty, if I allow myself to be dishonest or to just think dishonest thoughts and harbor those and allow them to germinate, I am convincing myself that dishonesty is okay, to allow it in. And my chances of me becoming more dishonest about more things increases. And so
and you're really trying to prove that the dishonesty becomes truth the longer you maintain it. That's the
Exactly.
obsession. That's the impossibility of the obsession of the obsessive attempt. It's never going to do it. And one of the other things is to notice that the principles are principles no matter what we think about them at all. And that's a huge concession, because now I realize most of what I think isn't right. But it doesn't mean I can't adjust. What it means is that when I think it's right, I'm over adjusting and oversteering and overcompensating in a direction that will never make it right, but only create more and more wrong in the name of thinking I'm going to get right. And that's the mental sickness that my suspicion has led humanity to all of the wars we've ever fought, because they always come down to a simple point. Two groups of people who don't think like each other feel justified to kill each other. And it happens on an individual basis. It happens on the group basis. The idea that we're so threatened that we need to kill somebody to stop their thinking is the same thing somebody does when they commit suicide, thinking the only way to stop the thinking that's driving them crazy, that they say, I can't take any more of, is going to stop it, rather than realize that they're contributing to it in the name of thinking that it's their brain doing it. We're talking about it as though it's happening to us rather than created by us. So while we act like we're the creators of reality, we deny the creations we actually manifest and the manifestations of those creations. Interesting.
But I would like, when you finish up, I would like to say something.
That's it.
I would like to go back to what Douglas said about the clean water and the tint, and that you put a few drops of the dye, and then the water gets corrupted. I think the water, the deep water, cannot be corrupted, cannot be tinted. That's why redemption is always possible, no matter what. Because in the essence, the truth is the truth, and the truth cannot be tinted by any way. It is very dangerous and very puritanical to think that pure water can be corrupted. And I understand what you're trying to say, Douglas, but it's a razor's edge, because if you go too much into that, what you find yourself is Calvinism, Inquisition, dogma, etc. I just want to point to that.
Well, at the same time, my sense is, Santiago, he's talking, emotions are always associated to colors. And I would imagine that we skew the air that we're in, the air that we breathe, with these ideas that are always divisions of color, because the totality of white, of all colors, is white, which has always been associated to enlightenment and the purity of an absolute source and love. So any division tends to create emotions, which we always assign to a color. It doesn't mean that changes reality. And even the oceans, a friend of mine's daughter is working on her PhD at Stanford in oceanography. And she said, whenever the oceans get filled with oil, like BP, they put more contaminants to look like they were cleaning it up into the water. And if it had just been left alone, the ocean would have cleaned itself. And pretty soon the thing that discolored it and disshaped it and created obstacles would all of a sudden be on the shore, and it could have been cleaned up all by itself. But we go to great lengths to try to make it look like we're doing things, to give the appearance we're doing things, when in fact we're complicating the things that we're doing by doing more of the thing to give it a greater sense of, actually in exact alignment with what you're saying, Santiago. You can't overcome an infinite source by doing more.
The lie Yeah, the lie always begets another lie. I have to
Yes.
cover the lie because I don't want anybody to know that it was a lie. So I make up another lie to try to make it look more like truth. And
Well,
I
and
continue to do that.
the person you're really afraid to have know it is the one you think you are, because you think that would finally contaminate and pollute the self that's been polluting your contaminated thoughts all along. And it scares us to actually face this stuff. You know, to Anthony's point, when you start looking at this clearly, you're going to feel the fear that you have maintained in your body in ways that are very uncomfortable, because the body is held in tension, trying to maintain the toxicity that has come into our body, trying to separate it, to keep us from experiencing it, to keep us from being poisoned by it. And as you let it go, it releases in our body, and it's not comfortable. But not being comfortable doesn't violate the premise of reality being real. It simply allows us to begin to unravel the tension in our own body so it can begin to function in health, aligned with the healthier thoughts we're starting to actually engage with. It's very natural.
When I first began recovery 24 years ago from alcoholism, it was kind of like recognizing how untruthful I had been to myself and to others. It was kind of like the reverse, maybe, of what I was saying earlier about the water and the dye. I realized that I was a bowl of pure indigo dye. I lied so much. I had created such a false impression of myself for myself, and such a story of what the world was doing and everything else. Just lived in really a false reality, which is not a reality at all.
Very good.
A false idea of reality. And so as I began to get honest about that things, and I began to recognize what the dishonesty was generating, and how it had calcified into so many areas of my life and that of others. It was kind of like pouring the clear water into the blue dye. And then as I got more and more and more honest, the blue dye began to flush out. And next thing you know, I've got a light blue bowl of semi-truthful guy and thinking. And I may never, ever get all of the blue dye out of that bowl. But the more that I practice being honest, and the more I recognize dishonesty, like I'm about to say or do something that would be dishonest, and I stop myself, the more clear water I add to that bowl. But there's always a little part of me that's afraid, that remembers how I thought I got away with things when I was lying so much.
Oh.
And there's a little part of me that doesn't want to give up that maybe the last ditch salvation that I'll need one day. Don't want to give up that practice completely. I want to keep it around just in case truth doesn't seem to be working one day, and I'll just yank out a lie and tack it up on the board and see what anybody says.
Is your birthday in January, Douglas? I like what you shared.
It is not.
Would you have one in January for Anthony's? So, Douglas, a couple of points, and it leads back to Santiago's also. First of all, if we create this imagery, and you talked about the calcification and all that kind of stuff, all of those things are attempts to actually give this falseness some form of reality by creating images that seem to be sticky and harsh and hard, and calcification tends to stick to things, and it's like rocks and all that stuff. But in fact, those are just words we use to actually give identity to the experience we've had, which is nothing wrong with that. But in the story, to Santiago's point, if what we're doing, and you corrected your thought by saying the reality and saying, no, that was false reality, which means it's nothing at all. If the whole thing is delusional, we're not holding on to anything but a thought that it has reality, that it is real to any degree. So the ultimate thing that you're talking about, Anthony, and that Santiago is pointing to, is that if the absolute nature is absolute and it's always the essence, it isn't water, it isn't any of the elements. It's actually an invisibility that's indivisible and yet ever present. And how do we know it's present? Because it's been with us. We've always known it. We have just simply circumvented our knowing of it in our thinking that our thinking would somehow dominate it. Because if I'm reality, it means that I'm opposing reality, which can't be opposed, only confirmed by what I'm doing. Follow me? All I ever end up with are internal disturbances. And the idea that we can get away with things mentally is interesting, because you can get away with somebody else's money and you can get away with their fruit and vegetables and you can get away with their car. But when you're dealing with mental issues, we're right. We always get away with them because they come right along with us. And
it's interesting.
We think of it in terms as being connected to something other than us, like they can be left behind, when in fact to maintain them is to take them everywhere we go, and wonder why the world seems to be as screwed up everywhere we end up, because we're seeing through that same lens. So I think that covered most of the points that I'm seeing and hearing. And the idea that your essence or anyone's essence isn't pure would be to suggest that all God gave us was something God didn't have. And in the fifth step, we say we admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being. There's the Trinity, is that we're not alone. We actually have a source that's greater than any human construct, but is also very intimately a part of it all. And we have other people that we can talk to. Doesn't mean we have to tell everybody everything and take out an ad like we're filing a new name for a business and publicly put everybody on notice that we're depressed and vulnerable. I mean, we don't have to do that. We can talk about it with people close and like we do with our fifth step. But the transition there is starting to see that we're always communicating with everybody, and everything we're doing is having an impact. So the question is, are we practicing principles, or are we practicing a lack of principles in the activity that we're doing? Are we sending out diseased messages, or are we actually beginning to function on a basis of health and allow someone else to do what they're doing without contest, but notice that we can offer them something that might stabilize what they're doing and make what they're doing more obvious? Because part of the helping of others, in my experience, there's a lot of people that I know do a lot of service whose life is in a mess. And to think that all we're going to do is feel better by helping others while we don't do the thing that we're told to do, which is to clean a house, says, trust God, clean house, serve others. Cleaning a house precedes serving others. Meaning if today my house isn't clean, what I'm doing to help people isn't helping them at all. I'm helping them get worse, the same way I used to help myself to the idea that getting over the pain was the goal, rather than start to look at it and say the pain is an accurate reflection of what I'm doing that's wrong. It's telling me, like a mirror is saying, you're doing something wrong here. And I think the goal in life is overcoming it. That's addiction. Every compulsion tries to overcome that impulse by feeling better about something in the short run, which causes greater grief in the long run. It's a cumulative effect that cannot be denied forever. While it's never denied, it takes us time, which is why pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. It seems as though pain, when it's unbearable, finally has us confront what we've known all along we think we were getting away with. And we sure were. We were getting away with it and adding little pinches of dynamite or gunpowder. And all of a sudden it explodes. And we're like, did that happen? I didn't have anything to do with that. Oh, yes, we did. It's crazy. So my sense is the infinite part that Santiago is talking about, which really blurs the lines for religion because it begins to unify all concepts of this sort under the guise of source that can't be divided, that can't be fought for, that can't be spiteful, hateful, and give people the impression the best thing we can do is fight other people and kill them because they don't think like us, is to begin to see that that's the essence of essence. That is absolutely, if it's true, that's the reality that we keep seeking, and yet we've never lost it. In all the seeking we did, we just kept claiming the seeking was actually the claim that we didn't have it and needed to find it elsewhere. We wanted credit for getting it rather than gratefulness for having it. That's all we've been looking for, is credit. You know why? We're bankrupt. Don't people who are bankrupt want more credit than anyone else? Of course. That's why they don't give them money. So there's a purity here. And the one of the absolutes that came out of the Oxford group that led to the 12 steps in all of its incarnations now for all of the different 150 or 200 symptomatic programs was honesty, unselfishness. All of a sudden, unselfish means there's no self. Think of the word selfish. It's kind of ish a self. It's like kind of a self, selfish, kind of like, you know, I mean, the only other one I can think of like that is Jewish, but I wouldn't say that it's kind of a religion. I would say that's a religion, you know, that's Judaism. But anyway, it works with selfish. And I think that's interesting because it's kind of a self, which means it isn't a self at all. It's just a self-imposed idea, a self-induced idea of thinking of itself. And all of a sudden it becomes who we are. That's a big leap. But if we're seeing it clearly, we're starting to actually hesitate a little more in the things we do that we begin to see are actually causing the thing we're claiming to want to stop, and start noticing how chronically habituated we've become and constantly redoing it, wondering why it seems so hard to stop. As though we're doing it, to Santiago's point, without even thinking anymore. It's just happening to us. And I don't know anybody who thinks they're responsible for their addiction. The whole point of it, it's like somebody going into an insane asylum and saying, I'm insane. And they would say, well, come back when you're not, then you'll qualify to be taken in. Because if you admit you're insane, you obviously have the awareness to know, and they're going to say, okay, go work on that a little bit. Come back when you aren't. The delusion of it all is reinforced by the ideas we keep chronically maintaining, when in fact there's nothing there to hold on to whatsoever. That's the ultimate. In Bill Wilson saying let go absolutely is starting to see we haven't held on to anything but the idea in the present there was something to hold on to. Go ahead, Santiago.
Yeah, in the religion that I was educated, they said that if you do X, Y, or Z, you will damage your soul. You will, in other words, you will tint your pure water with a color that won't be able to separate. And how is possible that the soul that is connected to what we call God, or call it whatever you want, how that can be tinted because I touch my cock or I don't. So
We're losing you a little.
is the truth that lives in me.
Yes, and everyone too, which is interesting to begin to consider that if that truth is true, then it must be true for everything. To start to see that something that's absolute can't be divided in some way, which means it can't be more or less for anyone or anything. And that's a profound shift in saying, wow, there's not much I need to do about everything. Now the question is, what can I do about everything? Now what part can I play with everyone? And realize that we've always had an impact on everyone and everything. We thought we had no influence. We thought we didn't matter. We thought we didn't count. No, those were just perfect representations of the thinking we were doing that didn't count, that didn't matter. Didn't mean we didn't matter. We were having an effect on everyone anyhow. It just wasn't the kind of people say, I want to make a change. I said, you're always making a change. I want to make a difference. You're always making a difference. The question is, are you making the change and the difference you want to make in the world? Are you giving it something that's actually beneficial? Are you freeing it from this sense of bondage that seems to have captivated our attention for so long and seems so normal as to be something that seems impossible to stop? And we talk in those terms about, well, nobody's ever going to do that. Why? If they're doing something that's killing them, wouldn't it be pretty simple to say, well, let's stop doing that. Let's stop putting our hands in fire and wonder why we're burning. That would be pretty easy to do for most people. It might be hard to admit that they thought it was truth and reality that drove them to do such insanity, but so what? That's easy to get over once you finally say, oh, I'm out of the fire. I don't need to be burned anymore. I don't need to use being burned as an excuse to finally face things. I can notice that I'm already in them, experiencing them, and what I'm doing about them, as you pointed out, Santiago, it's what we choose to do with what's happening that creates that sense of things being right or wrong, real or true. And it's the transition of thinking what we're doing is supporting something that's true or real, when truth and reality do not need us to fight for them at all. Ever, ever, ever.
Not use anymore. I am not doing this. I cannot use anymore. I am not doing this because I am not good enough, because that is an excuse, because not being good enough is just fictitious and fake. The truth is that
it's a good representation of a thought that isn't good enough to have any basis.
exactly.
And we feel those things and we say those things, those words we use. I don't feel good. I feel wrong. I feel empty. All those things are reflections of thoughts. If we think thinking about thinking is who we are, we think those thoughts all of a sudden become who we are. So I'm never good enough, when in fact, it's just a thought that isn't good. And yet we get the absolute confirmation of what we're doing and thinking, and then turn it into who we think we are because we think the thoughts are true. That transition.
And this connects to the original question of that we start the meeting, is why, if I am working on this, there are days that I feel bad. Anthony was talking about that. Well, it's as fake as anything else. Correct, Jack?
Yes. Well, it's beginning to see that there must be a lot more going on than we think we're responsible for. And we have catered to this idea that we're really not responsible. We can't even, if responsibility, which Jana had a huge shift of awareness with at one point, if responsibility is a capital R, like absolute is a capital A, and self as a capital is something that is inviolable and indivisible and absolute, if responsibility is responsible, then we're always responsible. Though we can act irresponsibly, we are responsible for the irresponsible actions we take. That's a very big difference than thinking we are naturally irresponsible, because that would mean acting irresponsibly would be the most responsible thing we could do. And that doesn't make any sense at all, because it would mean starvation and murder and mayhem would be the nature of our existence. Doesn't add up. And contraction eventually has to stop. Expansion never has to stop. So to think in terms that feed themselves is to constantly, to the point about the water, the stagnation of that thinking go round and round creates toxicity, just like stagnant water ends up getting poison. One of the fundamental aspects of life, our bodies are made largely of water, becomes stagnant if we continually feed from the same trough over and over. The thinking about the thinking becomes toxic, and our body wears that toxicity and disease. It's created, it's self-manifested. It's trying to prove it's real by creating things by creating pain that is very hard not to feel is real. Very hard not to feel pain is something that's happening that's real. But if it's a manifestation of something wrong that we're doing, we're using it to give us a chance to begin to look at how far we're willing to go before we finally concede our responsibility for what we're doing. And that's a pretty sick effort. So if emotional sobriety is sanity, it's sane living, beginning to actually notice that sanity is the basis of this absolute loving source. There is no insanity in reality and truth. It's only happening in brains of humans concocting ideas that aren't true and wondering why we feel condemned, wondering why we ask these questions as though it's not us conveniently. Santiago, to your original point. Why does this keep happening? Why is the world? Why is this? Why? Always questioning and wondering why we have this constant sense of doubt. Rather than start saying that it's happening is happening, and I must be absolutely a part of everything that's happening to even exist within everything that's happening. There is no division in everything that's happening. It's all connected. Everything that's happening right now, anywhere anything's happening, is happening right now. We don't need to see it or think about it for that to be the case. And all of a sudden, there's very little to say.
Is there a major difference between your philosophy, the Hoffman philosophy, and there is a solution with AA? Is there a major difference?
My reading of the big book has Bill seeing this and not, he saw it, he wrote about it, he said things very clearly about this. He said, we turn from finite self to infinite objectives. He's talking about it consistently. And yet he struggled with emotional depression and different things. And I would suggest that the idea that the absolute is absolute regardless, there's an element within AA that says we didn't know it when it was happening until we knew it. And my sense is that breach makes us capable of being irresponsible and victims. And how could we be victims to something that's self-imposed and self-induced? My sense is the only difference here, Anthony, is that we're taking it from the symptomatic point of view and starting to see that all those symptoms that have relied on the 12-step for freedom from the symptoms have also been addressing the mental issue. And we can be free of it, which means that we will start looking at all the compulsive behaviors we're doing and all the reactive behaviors we're acting on and all the impulsive behaviors we're acting on, because they're all part of the same blue bowl. They're all part of that discolored idea of who we are, what we are, and how we are. And all of a sudden, those don't become questions anymore, because who we are becomes as we are, and where we are becomes where we are. Not a question, just a statement. If we are as we are, that's pretty easy to conclude. It doesn't take a lot of brain power. And to think in general terms would mean that that must be true for everybody else. Now we're on an even playing field with all that are and all that is. So the game involves everyone, and the difference in a game that's absolute is that everybody wins. There's no losers. And even in this thing we call life, the losing becomes the lesson of the absolute. It's a textbook for exactly what we're claiming not to think we know. Consequences giving us an absolute mirror image of what it is that we're claiming not to know, when in fact, when we see it, we know it. We've known it all along. We just haven't wanted to admit it.
If this was implemented in a school system, what grade would it be implemented, so to speak? And what would the core be? Don't tell yourself, don't think you're believing your own stories, or where does the whole problem start appearing? And what would be
when the adults start acting like adults? You couldn't teach this by adults who are acting immature, because they demand everybody listen. It's how people act. The campus we share is called planet Earth. That's our campus.
Well, where does it start happening in school? Like, as you're building who you are and you're trying to determine things and you're fitting in it, is it that ego at some point, or is it the line? Where does it start?
The kids know it. All they do is become indoctrinated by all the adults' bad habits and thoughts, and then they feel infected by it. And most teenagers hate their parents for it because they start realizing it was all nonsense. But it doesn't, Anthony, everybody's coming here with it fully intact. The idea you need to teach people is it's kind of like mathematics or fishing. When people realized you could put a hook on the end of a string, it didn't take a lot of other people a long time to begin doing that. They didn't have to sit in some educational platform to actually say, oh, that works. I don't have to go out and grab it with my hands. That's clever. I'll do that. I can do that. And they started making hooks the same way they started sharpening stones and attaching them to sticks and all kinds of stuff. Once something works, everybody sees it and does it quickly. And there's absolutely no difference in the kind of intuitive. Douglas was talking earlier about that awareness of knowing. That is intuition. Intuition is defined as knowledge beyond reason. It means it's not reason, understanding, and thinking. It's a sense of knowing that just knows it knows. And it's aware that it's aware. When I was 10, my mother brought my little sister home, Joy, and I could see in her all of the things I knew to be true in my own experience. Just sitting with her, I knew that her gaze was taking everything in. She wasn't figuring it out and trying to decide whether she liked it or not. She was just there witnessing it. And it was the first time in my life I witnessed it in another human being, because I'd been around people who were a little beyond that infant stage. But it was very confirming to see that and actually appreciate it and take care of her and think of her, as a comrade at arms of sorts, rather than a pain in the ass to babysit.
Right.
So my sense is, if we know it and we start acting that way simply because we stop the reactivity, which tends to create reactivity in others. Just like if you ran towards somebody full speed, they're probably going to think, I got to get away from this guy. It's probably going to be some impulse to avoid you. Or having a car coming at you at 60 miles an hour. It's generally you generally don't stand around and think about what to do. That reaction has fear in a healthy sense actually tells us what to do. The fear of addiction tells us exactly the opposite of what we should do. It kills us. So that knowingness, expressing it, my sense is, as Bill saw in his hospital bed, that alcoholics around the world could get sober at a point in history that had never happened. People who were doing drugs and alcohol were generally killed, institutionalized, either in prisons or in mental hospitals, or exiled from wherever they were, abandoned, kicked out of cities and towns, like lepers. That same sort of attitude. His transition allowed people to see that. What he allowed us to see is that if we can simply admit something about something, we can do that same thing about everything. When we start seeing that everything is in fact everything, rather than simply what we think of it. To start to think in absolute terms, which he went over. He talked about absolute, unlimited, omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing. Infinite was another one of the words. 5 words he used for that knowingness. He saw it, he knew it. But the book was also written for somebody who was so self-centered as to think drinking was the only thing they could do. And when people heard there was a book they could read, people who never even had the thought of what sobriety meant started reading it and started recovering as a result of it. Because their thinking changed. He opened a door to starting to look at things differently. What did he say? Self-centeredness is the problem. Spirituality is the solution. Why? Because there's no problem in spirituality that's absolute when it's actually seen correctly. And all of the problems are coming from a self we think is only thought thinking of itself. It's all coming from this idea, this imagined idea we have about who we think we are, which will never be who we are, no matter how much we think about it. So my sense is, if the self with a capital S is the self that we all are, it's what we all share. It isn't divided. It isn't me and you. It's us. We seem to get sober alone, which to one of Santiago's ideas or thoughts was that we have this sense of separation in our thinking because we get to choose what we want, but everybody else also has that same freedom. But the fact that we can choose what we want is, in fact, the responsibility we have for the choices we make. And if we choose things we say we don't want and didn't mean, we're lying again about the fact that we simply didn't think that would be the outcome, and again shows that we thought thinking would get us to a place of only getting what we thought we wanted. Once again, thinking thought was the creator of reality, rather than see that consequences actually always give us exactly what we asked for. We just don't want to admit we had anything to do with it when we don't like it.
We asked the wrong question.
So consequences, my experience is they're telling us all the time exactly what we're asking for and what we did to get them. And being responsible for them becomes a lot less difficult than trying to fight them and pretend they're not happening, because how good can I be at fixing a problem if I'm not even claiming to have that problem? If I start actually noticing that these veers and these shifts that I take, I can adjust to very, very flexibly and easily when I'm not trying to take a position against everything or anyone or anything and anything, everything, anyone or someone. When I stop seeing that that's a viable direction, I start sitting a little longer and saying, okay, I'm in the position I'm in. Things are happening the way they're happening. maybe if they get worse, I'm going to have better clarity on what was possible that I didn't even imagine. And maybe that worse will be better. And that's a pretty interesting concept. To me, when I started thinking that way, I realized I'd thought my whole life depended on always fixing things the way I thought they should be, never conceding that maybe if I just let them go and fall apart, something would come out of them better than I could have imagined or would have imagined. Because all I imagined was my own involvement in manhandling and forcing and pushing. And I still have that tendency. It hasn't disappeared. Circumstances, when they seem to overwhelm me, create reactions that seem to have been gone while I wasn't being overwhelmed. So it's good evidence that the potential, that if we were given full possibility, it's always possible. That's why the big book says we can recover from alcohol, but we are not cured of the disease. And again, I think Bill saw this because it was a mental problem. And he talked about emotional sobriety as being the next pioneering phase. He talked about the 12 steps being a potential for social pioneer or technological changes at a social level, starting to see that this way of operating has benefits for all, exactly as he said. So he saw in the grandest way that this was all possible. And my sense is we are his legacy in that regard. We are his potential to let our legs carry us in the direction he started and gave us to have legs to stand on. It's partly, Anthony, why I don't see this as a program, but simply a discussion, because if we can talk about it like we have today, and it's taken us a while to get to the point where we're talking about it, if we can talk about it here for an hour or two, certainly the other 168 hours till the next time we get together are going to be a little different in our approach, because it starts to become obvious that there's a lot more going on than I've been paying attention to. And when I start seeing that, I begin to realize I've had a lot more resource to confront them honestly than I ever imagined too. That intuition starts to give me guidance, and I start saying and doing things that even catch me off guard, to the point where gratefulness becomes natural. I don't have to come up with a list to all of a sudden say, I never would have thought of that. How incredible. I didn't even think before I said it, but it actually made the difference I couldn't have imagined making. Because that freedom begins to allow that flow, to allow our bodies to function the way they're designed naturally. And that's health, and it is inspiration. And I suspect as quickly as we can undermine our capacity in our body through stress and pressure and anxiety, inspiration will heal those things as quickly as we see people get sober who have had drug or alcohol problems for 30 years. In 2 years, they look normal. They don't look like they drank for 30 years, because the body's primary objective is health, not sickness. And recovery is about recovering at a we talk about the disease being progressive. If somebody's sober for 10 years and goes out, they start drinking as though they never stopped. But we don't talk a lot about it being progressive in terms of health too, where if it took us 30 years to get so bad, it takes us only a year or two to get better in terms of our health. We can recover most of the things that we lost during that protracted period of time very quickly, because we're now operating aligned with how things are, which is abundant and fruitful and beneficial and gainful and useful, rather than useless and hateful and spiteful and contemptful, all those other things. I don't know if contemptful is a word, but I like it. Full of contempt rather than full of greatness. Gratefulness is just the recognition that if we have an absolute source, the ability to express it gives us the ability to be full of a greatness that we express. And that is a grateful awareness. Comes simultaneously. It's not something I need to put any effort into. I just smile and radiate a little bit and feel like, well, that gives me a great experience to know that I can even do more and keep just heading in that direction. And if it's true for any of us, it's true for all of us. And that's pretty cool, because now we become complicit with everyone on earth to do the best we can, rather than think of everyone as impossible and never wanting to hear and never going to do anything. And if you talk to people, pretty much people, oh, nobody's ever going to do that. Well, that's interesting that we would decide for them what they're going to do and not do while we're deciding ourselves about them that it won't ever happen. Why do we think it would happen if we're deciding it won't? We're going to make sure it doesn't to support the thought, to have it look right and real, because it's an insane thought to think. So my sense is paradigm shifts have always happened. They're quick. They're synonymous with people simply stopping for a moment. And I'm hearing a lot of people say, I don't know what to make up about what's going on. And I think that's a big opening.
Mhm.
It's a big shift in people's, because normally people would say, well, I just need to work harder. I just need to do this, that, or the other thing. I need a vacation. There's some excuse to get away from it. And right now, people are realizing I'm not getting away from it this time. It seems to go wherever I'm going. I don't know what to do. That's a great opening to starting to consider things that maybe haven't been considered collectively. And if anyone does it, the impact of that is dramatic compared to nobody doing it. So
I
our
just
job,
need to get my water more clean.
yes. Once you get it clear, let us know. It's interesting too, if you took a drop of blue, perfect blue, and put it in the ocean, how much of an effect would that have on the ocean for how long? Obviously, it has an effect, but it would dissipate pretty quickly. So we're talking about something infinite. Here's something infinitely interesting. In the infinite, you cannot make a point, because it would have to displace something. It would have to take place. It would have to take space. There is no space in an infinite source. There is no time in an infinite source. It's not even beyond space and time, because that would mean it isn't where we are. So to begin contemplating what is infinite is to completely take the rational structure apart of thinking and realize that thinking is just something we do to navigate this spacesuit that we've got, that we're wearing for the time that we're here, this thing we have to do the best we can with what we have, which means probably eating better, breathing deeper, taking care of our bodies so we can feel better in the things we do for others, rather than thinking of food as a sport and something to feel good about all the time and eat the wrong thing. Start to actually notice that nourishing our bodies is important. Very important to be fed well and sleep well and be healthy. Those aren't things that are selfish. They're things that are just prudent to do. Eating well and being well, well-being is all about doing things better. Why? Because it makes me better for others. It makes me more able for others. It gives me a chance to do more for others without having to be preoccupied with the depreciation that I create in my own experience. And it's happening. I mean, we actually have grocery stores now that are called Whole Food, which is a fairly blatant admission that we were eating half shit for years. I used to think that's what grocery stores sold, was food, but apparently not. So now that we have that and can see that, it might be worth noticing that part of that is because we've gotten so far from the basics of just functioning off of the land and utilizing nature in its purest form by trying to overuse it and over abuse it and wonder why we have allergies. Our body doesn't know what to do with the things we've created, so it creates allergies to counter it. Allergy from sugar is one of them. That's the basic allergy of alcohol. All alcohol is sugar. Almost everything that is compulsively eaten is a refined something or another. Too much concentrated sugar. Sugar in its natural form with cane has tremendous amounts of fiber in it, which helps balance the intake in the body. Refining it like cocaine or refining it like heroin or refining it like any of the other drugs is a distillation, a reduction down to the most potent effects. And our body doesn't know what to do with it. So what does it do? Something exactly the opposite of what it should do. Rather than stop it, ask for more, give me more and I'll figure out how to deal with this. What I need is more and more and more and more to figure out what's wrong. That's addiction. It's the same thing with the thinking. It all stems from thinking that we're going to figure it out if we just have more. What I need to do is think about it more, further, longer, harder, and I'll feel great. Wondering why I start feeling life is hard. I'm creating the experience. Did you guys read the announcement this week? Anybody?
Yeah.
I did.
I wanted to, that quote I heard, why talk to God about problems when you can talk to your problems about God?
Right.
I thought that was pretty aligned with what we're talking about here, is starting to see that if we're expressing an absolute source, we're not treating disease as any other than something just wrong in terms of thought. We're actually seeing it now as a delusion rather than something real. And there's nothing we need to particularly fix, but our thinking about it and beginning to be inclusive, which in the fifth step is about integration, which is inclusiveness, and starting to see that we have dramatic impacts on everyone else's health, not just our own. It's not just our body we affect. It's the body of humanity, the body of the earth. It's the body of nature. We affect it all.
I heard that quote as instead of telling God how big my problems are, to tell my problems how big my God is.
Well, and part of that is beginning to realize that if God is infinite, whatever this thing is, we use this word, which can be very, very difficult for people to hear, and religion can be very difficult for people to hear because their experiences, once you get an organization wrapped around an idea, you're going to find corruption. It's just natural for humans because the ideas become central to that's one of the reasons AA has the traditions, was to avoid that. It turned the hierarchy upside down. So the president of AA is at the top of the pyramid, but the pyramid's turned upside down. So the top are the stakeholders. Who are they? Anyone that decides they have a desire to stop drinking, they become a member. All they need is a desire to stop drinking. They don't even have to stop drinking. They come to meetings and drink if they want. But if they have a desire, they can stay. They're members. Interesting. So the stakeholders that are generally thought of as at the bottom are at the top. The pyramid's upside down. So we don't do anything. We don't take any positions that conflicts with our primary purpose, which is helping another alcoholic to get better. So the whole thing begins to unravel what we do. We use this word God, and it's been used so viciously by humans that we think of it as a bad word, when all it is a word referencing an infinite, indivisible, undeniable source. So to think of it in those other terms is a chance to take the wording off of it that can seem so caustic and reactive, and start to notice that none of the words was ever the thing we defined anyhow. Those were all just words associated to thoughts that we were referencing those things. And start to notice that if that infinite source is infinite, then we can't even make sense out of it in our own thinking. But if you contemplate something with no beginning or no end, I guarantee you, as you consider it, you're not thinking obsessively about anything. Because it creates more and more. For that drop of blue, when you're in an infinite, it's gone before it even hits. If it were water, there's nothing there to absorb, to be distinct or separate, because an infinite source seems to be wherever any of us go when we want it, meaning it's always everywhere and always nowhere and always whatever. It's just the present state of being everywhere all the time. Imagine something that never has a beginning. And yet, for us, in our experience, it's always starting wherever we are. The newness of the potential for us to choose is every single moment, to Santiago's point earlier. We make those choices individually, but we get sober together, because the choice to get sober and the choice to listen, and the choice to listen to an idea that may be true, the choice to begin to entertain truth as truth, we can think we block by thinking it isn't true, but we don't block it at all. All we do is create the impression of a block within our own thinking, and then, like blockheads, keep thinking more about what we're thinking in our heads and wonder why we feel like a blockhead and feel like we have a chip on our shoulder because pieces of the block are falling off because we're getting hammered. They end up on our shoulder, and now it's written on our sleeve. We talk about all these things of exposing ourselves, which are also associated with the idea that we're hiding ourselves, that somehow we're going to keep it to ourselves and we're going to get better, when in fact there's no self to keep it to, and it's written on our face. People see it, they experience it, they know something's wrong, and we say, when we got a runny nose, I'm sick. When we get running thoughts, we say, I'm fine, thanks. How are you? Why? Cover it up. Don't mention it. The last thing we want to do is talk about it. Why? Because it would reveal vulnerability. That means somebody can take advantage of us. If we are insane, think of the advantage that's been taken of us in ways that we never even imagined, because all we were imagining was everybody that was doing everything was just great. Or people who did any slight thing were absolutely so horrible as to have caused me such great pain, when in fact it was my over proportion of assignment of their responsibility rather than accepting my own and admitting it that I was seeing, looking for somebody to put my lack of responsibility on the heels, looking for a donkey to pin the tail on.
Mhm.
So part of where I want to start heading the conversation is seeing this. How can we speak in terms that begin to address things that can happen in the world, the entire world, not just some of it, not just locally, like Amnesty International says, think globally, act locally. Let's think about it locally to see what possibilities we can actually start talking about that we've never talked about openly. Things that may seem absurd to consider could happen, but it doesn't mean we can't think about. If we can think about insanity being reality, we can certainly think about reality being real. we can certainly start thinking about things in a global fashion rather than just in a localized, personal, self-centered fashion story.
I have a
Yes.
quote of the day from you.
Go.
My my over proportion of assignment of their responsibility. That is fucking so awesome, Jack. And you just blurted it out like it was the most normal thing and none of us commented on it. But it's like the crux of everything. If I love him enough, he's responsible to respond to that or whatever the fuck it is. But
How can he do this to me?
yeah, our over proportion of assignment of
Yeah.
their responsibility. That is so beautiful. I'm going to make a bumper sticker. I don't know how many people will get it, but I totally get it.
Well, Bill Wilson said in the Big Book, we suffer from a lack of proportion.
Oh, clearly it's horrifying.
Yeah. So my experience was that means I make everything out of nothing and then make nothing out of everything. That's that to that point earlier, Santiago, this idea that I can deny everything and that I actually deny it means that I'm delusional to think I can deny reality and truth by preoccupying myself with sick thoughts, insanity. I think I become consumed with insanity, and we're really dealing with the crux of mental health here. It seems absurd to think of it as so simple as simply entertaining a thought as being reality. But think about that. If the thought has no basis in reality and we think it's real, we are seeing and hearing things because of the conversation we're having with this self that seems to have this thought. We're seeing and hearing things in the stories we tell that aren't even happening. That's exactly the definition of insanity. So the idea that we can get away from it simply by acting normal and seeming normal and all that means that we've normalized abnormality and sickness and disease and think, well, disease, we become very, very accepting of disease and think healing is some rare miracle. That's crazy. Our bodies are designed to heal. They're constantly striving for homeostasis. They're designed to maintain balance. Why they get out of balance? I keep subjecting them to things they can't keep up with. In the choices I make, the anxiety, the stress, it undermines every one of the bodily systems, including those we haven't even identified that are operating in our favor, undermined by our disfavor in terms of our own thinking.
I could find a co-conspirator that would agree with my sense of entitlement to someone else's energy because I have over proportion of assignment of their responsibility that they owe me something because I've done something. Like it's an unfair exchange of energy, but I'm pretty sure if I created my story in a creative enough way, I could find a co-conspirator that would agree with me. That's the mental health issues.
Yes. And the idea that we would go so far to collect people to camouflage what we're doing rather than simply admit what we're doing is insane shows how insanity seems to feed on itself, just like vicious thoughts seem to feed on themselves. And that reactiveness seems to feed, like Santiago said earlier, corrupt thought, poison thought creates a poison thought. It will birth them as long as we think. If they were real, we'd have a real problem. But they aren't real, so we don't really have a problem. What we have is an imagination problem, thinking what we imagine to be reality. If an image of something that we create in our brain, a narrative that we create, is simply imagined, that isn't reality, it's imagination. To begin to see that we're just imagining these things is the beginning of allowing the thoughts to be thoughts and just say, that's just what I'm thinking. It's just a thought. And start to allow it to take on a proportion that's equal to the proportion it takes by being what it is. And there is no conflict in allowing things to be what they are. It's ultimately what humility is about. Humility isn't a disproportion of anything. It's an absolute portion of everything.
We have to be careful of our co-conspirators, because recently I was having a little relationship dilemma, and two of the women that I know that gave me very detailed, like super detailed things that I was to demand of this other human being in order to make things right. One of them hasn't had a relationship in a decade, and the other one's not sure if she's straight or gay and hasn't had a relationship in probably 2 decades. But those were the two co-conspirators that I shared my woe with, that came back with very detailed and got pissed off because I didn't co-conspirator back with them or agree with their demands. And one of them's not speaking to me because of it. And I thought, what the fuck is wrong with me that I even shared my angst with these particular co-conspirators? But it's good because I can laugh at it. And I know that my sense of proportion's all fucked up.
Well, and knowing that you can undo the reactivity as quickly as you see that it's simply something you're doing. There's freedom to not do it. And what I learned at first is I thought I needed, Anthony, to your point earlier about dinner and paying for it, I thought I needed to explain it to everybody because I'd been so used to explaining what was wrong is right for so many years. I thought when I finally started to align with this, I needed to explain what was right. And then I realized, no, just be with them. Just go with them. And what I found is a lot of people would pick up where we had never left off, literally. They would not react at all. This whole story I wouldn't come with it. They wouldn't perpetuate it. It was gone because I wasn't bringing it with me. I was seeing it for what it was. And I didn't expect, I realized I don't have to tell them why would I try to explain insanity? Wouldn't it be insane to try to explain insanity? Here, let me explain to you why I'm insane. Please listen. It's going to take about 7 or 8 years, but you may get it.
So the neutrality of it, right? Because you're kind of, it's kind of an admission of your angst and fears and insanity. And then you tell them your character defects, your angst and fear and anxiety, and then you tell them how you cleaned it up, and then you fucking want a pat on the back for that. And when you could forego the whole thing and just rest in it, and like you said, then they came to a place that they had never been at before.
Well, and what's interesting about that, Jana, is that perfection is letting things be what they are.
Yeah.
Right. If you compare something to itself, regardless if it's a damaged car and it's compared to itself, it's perfect because there are no variations. There are no comparisons and contrasting elements. And typically people think things are imperfect because they're comparing it to something else, which means that other thing is going to have more or less of something than the thing they think may be perfect. So it's an induced state of imperfection rather than begin to see that the neutrality, when you just let things be what they are, you realize you have no impulse to do anything about it at all because they vanish. There's nothing there. It's literally a dissolution of a supposed marriage we had that wasn't a good marriage to something that didn't even exist.
Yeah. You create the story and then you fix the story and then you want to get rewarded because I created the chaos. I'm all jacked up, but guess what? I'm not doing that anymore. So let me share the Jack story with you. And then let me tell you the better story. And then I want you to reinforce that when we could just rest in our neutrality and just be here now. I mean, I hate to sound like Ram Dass, but it saves so much brain damage and so much work and so much energy, and it's just better.
The big transition is starting to see that we're always here now. This has been one of the things through history that I've listened to and tried to make sense of, is all the methods that people give and teach to try to have us be where we are, as though delusion keeps us from being where we are. There is nothing keeping us from the present at all. To see it as something we need to get to is to think of it as something we're not there in as a result of delusion and insanity. There again, I'm perpetuating the story, beginning to concede that we're always in the present, we're always here now, we're always being as we are wherever we seem to be. It doesn't change. Begins to stabilize. You talk about that peace. The peace is the natural state of our already existence, of our present existence. We're just not thinking that way. And that clarification becomes very obvious when you begin to concede it's this way regardless of what I think, rather than it's only that way when I think. It's putting thinking again in the driver's seat, rather than saying, no, presence is always present, being is always being, absolute is always absolute. It's what I'm thinking about it that gives me the impression that being isn't being, and present isn't present, and here and now isn't here or now. That's all. Doesn't mean delusion ever had any impact on reality. It means it has impact on our thinking. And once we feed that thinking, we're going to start digesting things that don't feel very good. And our body's going to say, thanks, you're feeding me, but you're not giving me any nutrition. What I need is more food for thought, more food for thought. If the food is depleted of nutrition, I can feed my body for a month and it's going to ask for more food. My sense is that's one of the core issues of overeating.
But the neutrality is kind of giving me permission to not feel entitled to anything, to just the
You
old,
already got everything.
yeah, the old neutral that everything's okay. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, maybe it's just a hardwired thing that
we already all have everything.
Right. And there's
right now, everything that's happening anywhere, anything's happening. And I would say for us, what we call reality are things that are happening or that exist. Anything that's interactively happening right now, which I would say is everything, at least in the universe, I would say it's everything. And if there's anything beyond the universe, that thing beyond the universe must be part of what's happening here for it to exist at all. It can't be disconnected from it. It may be beyond its bounds, which allows this expansive universe to continue to expand. Maybe we create space as it goes. Whatever it is, it's there to be had, there to expand into. Whatever that is must be part of what we're witnessing right now, as we are here, with everything. And it sounds absurd to thoughts that consider that everything is only what we think is everything and see is everything, and that if we can't think of it, it doesn't exist. But I assure you that everything beyond the horizon on the planet is happening right now, regardless of whether we can see it. And everything beyond the walls we're in is happening right now, whether we can see it. And we don't have to think about it for that to be happening. That's a huge relief to the thought that I need to begin figuring it all out and getting to the bottom. You know what getting to the bottom of it is? A grave. People don't tend to want to claim that, so we talk about getting to the bottom of it. Where are we going? Where is the bottom when we come into Alcoholics Anonymous, or we come into Narcotics Anonymous, or any program? We talk about achieving a bottom. The bottom is only the point at which we realize we're not going any further down. That's it. Well, that point could be made at any time. Well, why not make it now? Why not see that digging further is never going to get us anywhere but deeper and deeper and deeper into debt, into trouble, into problems, into the disease, where in fact the present already has everything we seem to be digging deeper to get and look for. Because we think thinking is the solution. We think thinking is the reality. It isn't. It's just something we do. It's a facility we have, and to be used properly, it's brilliant and will express that intuition naturally without a fight whatsoever. We will have thoughts before we even think about having them, and that's a very different experience than the ones we spend 3 years trying to foment and generate before we get them to a point we're going to act on them and then realize the whole thing was built on a complete shaky foundation. And notice that we have nowhere to go with it, no matter how much time we spend waiting to get to the right mindset. There's nothing there but nonsense, which, by the way, doesn't make any sense.
Well, without the conflict and without the perceived joy of those chemicals that we create by either having a parade or having angst, it leaves very little to, I don't want to say this way, but I'm just going to say it. Fuck it. It leaves it doesn't leave a lot to relate to. Like, I spent a day with a guy that I didn't know yesterday, and I was super comfortable, but there was no parade and there was no angst. It was just pretty neutral, and he thought it was truly amazing and is all fired up about it. But it was a whole different way of being. You know what I mean? Like not looking for the angst and not telling myself like all day, this is going to be okay. I just was okay. I went and picked him up, and we drove over to Lahaina and got anyway, we went in the waterfall, we hung out, we sat on my deck, and then I dropped him off, and I never felt that angsty, either fear nor, I don't want to say joy, but the parade thing, it was pretty neutral, and it felt different than what I've experienced in my experience. But it also, there wasn't a lot of words, and I think maybe he was feeling a little angst because he started talking about politics and stuff, but even that didn't bug me. You know what I mean? Everything was just okay. It was super neutral. And for me, that's a different experience. It was.
Well, and I would say that's peace and stillness and quiet and silence. And, the nature of existence is not noisy and chaotic.
No, and it was just, everything was just okay. And it was great. Like, I didn't feel, maybe at the very end when I went to drop him off and he leaned in and I thought, oh, fuck, he's going to try and kiss me. I got a little angsty, so I kind of leaned back. But other than that, the whole 7 hours or something was very neutral. And I don't want to use the word normal, but it wasn't anything I had experienced in my life with a male of the species that potentially could have been something like a date or whatever. It was a friend of a friend, and we spent the day together. That's all it was. And it was interesting. It was just something I hadn't experienced before. And it was very peaceful. I mean, we went swimming in the waterfall. I was stronger than him. We moved some furniture together, and I was kind of surprised how strong I was, but it just wasn't weird. It was a lack of weirdness.
You know what's really weird about weird?
What?
Is that I is after the E, after a W.
And I didn't try and conjure too much. Normally, I
You
would
didn't get that.
Conjured. I after E, except after W.
What is it? I after E, except after C, or E after I.
I before E, except after C.
I before, yeah.
And yet in weird, what's weird is that it's backward.
Yeah. I before E, except after C.
But Gianna, you're talking about contentment, and contentment is content. Think of it. Content means there's something. If there's content, you're not discontent.
Right.
Discontent means there's no content. It's an empty thought parading as reality and truth, and masquerading that way by you generating a parade to make sure that there's so much fanfare and excitement that your thoughts that aren't true all of a sudden become reality. You can get slapped on the back all you want for things you're not doing, but you're not going to be doing those things you're getting slapped on the back for.
Right. You create the story and you ask for the slap on the back is the whole deal. And things are different, or things, they are what they are, but they're different because I didn't even have to tell my girlfriends that this was happening, or, share it or send pictures of the dude so they could see. None of that. And then my daughter called and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I just dropped off my date," kind of. And she's like, "What?" And but it was just neutral. And I guess that is contentment. And there was a sense of kind of confidence in the world, not the parade kind of confidence, like I'm hot or anything, just that it's okay to be. It's just okay. I didn't worry about if I looked fat in my bathing suit in the waterfall or anything. It was just, everything was just okay. And it's a sweet deal, the neutrality. Once you surrender to it or concede to it, it's really a amazing and lovely and beautiful, and life can just be not angsty or paradey, either of those things.
Think of the setup also of thinking that he was going to give you something that you don't have, and that thing then would take on a role. He would then have to take on a role of doing certain things to accommodate your expectations and desires.
So that would be,
And it's impossible.
that would be the over proportion of assignment of his responsibility.
Yes. But it just didn't, listen, if we're already relating to everybody right now, then beginning to relate to them on the most fundamental level is probably not going to be a sensational parade or a circus. It's probably just going to be nice and easy and insightful, and probably gain something that you can feel is being shared that doesn't even ever have to be spoken about, because people know. And if we do, operating on that basis is going to illuminate a lot more of what we know within our thinking than thinking we have to constantly figure out what we know. It just happens. The connection between us. We do that here to the degree that we do that here.
Yeah.
There's a sense of connection and camaraderie and a sense of connectedness that we actually, most of us have never met in person.
That's true.
Right?
I've
But
never met you.
Yeah.
You met him, but not me. I feel like comfortable with you, though.
Well, there's a sense of awareness. A lot of people say, well, Zoom doesn't have the same thing as being in person. And to a degree, I think that speaks to the desensitization that we have of thinking that we always need to touch to feel, and we always need to smell to feel, and all that stuff. When in fact, there's certainly an awareness that we have of each other. And I guarantee you that there's been opinions we've all had about each other that were generated by that awareness, whether it be right or wrong. There are things we do in our thinking and things we imagine and things that often what I find is the least I expect of somebody, the quicker they exceed my expectations. Mm-hmm. So I can have those sort of snap judgments and not even notice it, but I notice when they exceed it that I sort of appreciate them and then say, oh, I was depreciating them to have so much new appreciation. I wasn't expecting that from them.
So
there's a lot of setups.
I got a text from a very angsty friend. He's been in the program for, I think, 30 years now, and he suffers from a little bit of depression and stuff, but I have literally not seen this guy since high school. He's a Venice High guy, and he was a super nice guy always. But anyway, he says, I'm trying to get him over here because I said it only takes 2 to have a meeting. And anyway, no matter what walls he's put up, I go, hey, all you need to do is get on a plane and I'll take it from there. I'll pick you up at the airport. So he's finally sort of conceding a little bit. He says, Jana, you are a rare bird. To live with an open heart is not easy and rare. I'm a rare bird.
It's good.
Yeah, I guess I am a rare bird. I think that that open heart thing has been happened because of this meeting, because of giving me permission to just be.
Well, and I want to temper that a little bit too, now that you've thanked me. But just notice that we've been so cunning and baffling in the approach we've had to what we think, that often the things we think we're doing to help and serve other people are not helping them or serving them at all. And starting to see that the honesty factor really becomes critical to what we're doing. I have a tendency of over helping people because I want to be the guy that always helps. Started when I was young. I've always done it. I've always been able to manage getting things done. So I wanted to be the one doing things. And I would generally push others aside and take on more responsibility than I needed to for that. That hasn't been a healthy trend, because often I find myself at the other end wondering why the hell I'm doing everything. Right?
But do you have expectations because of that?
Well, part of it that I realized that became very sad to me is that I was really discounting other people's potential and really stripping them of their dignity to actually learn to do what they could and become part of the team. And that to me was there. It showed the disease thinking of making believe that I could push them aside and do for them what they could not. I did a ropes course once in one of those life experience things, and they had ropes set up that you were supposed to cross with somebody else. Well, I'm 6'3". I was probably 220 pounds then, pretty strong. They attached me to the oldest guy who was about 5 feet tall. My solution, I said, get on my shoulders. I'll carry you across.
I would have done that.
I couldn't do it. But it was very upsetting, and I didn't get it at the time what the upset was. But I did in time realize I'm taking people's potential from them by making believe it's up to me to do for them what they're perfectly capable of doing. And we're seeing this in society today. If people are getting worse in society today, they're getting bonuses, they're getting new condos, they're getting new apartments, they're getting money every month. Everybody who is lacking productivity is being given more as a solution. We're going to make them feel better, and that'll work. It's not going to work. It's dysfunctional to make believe that people don't have a productive capacity that, if realized, gives them a sense of esteem, gives them a sense of value and worth, and begins to step them back into a communion with their civilization or their species, rather than a sense of being a part. And what they need is, we're helping people get worse so we can give them more. That doesn't help them get better. It helps them get worse. They say, well, if I'm getting this for being this bad, I might as well get worse and I'll get even more. That's sick. We're leading people. That's exactly what addiction is. And that enabling is at the core of addiction. If a parent gave their son cash who had a coke or heroin problem, that kid would overdose. Just a matter of time. That would be considered illegal to contribute to the delinquency of a minor. And yet we do it in more public ways and don't see that sort of. In Los Angeles, they had a person, 1 to 2 people a week dying, overdosing on the street, and they were calling what they were doing compassionate. It's insane not to notice that if people are not getting better, and the state legislature 2 weeks ago said we spent billions of dollars and the problem's getting worse. What's wrong? Good catch. Do we need to spend 2 billion more to ask that question again, or start noticing we're not giving people the credit that's due? We're stripping them of their dignity and their potential. And they have that potential. They just haven't been expressing it. And to think that helping them get worse is better is sick. It's the same thing we do in our own thinking by thinking we're feeling better about things that are getting worse and wondering why those things end up getting so bad we think we can't even take the problem.
Yeah, that made me think of when I've thrown money at stuff and expected, had expectations in return, from my family, and expected they should treat me in a certain way because I bought them a house or something. And when you said that, they've thrown billions out there and it's not working, it's so funny how I could have in my mind replaced money with a sense of entitlement to their love of me, and I 10 years ago, I could have told you the whole story and tried to make you my co-conspirator, and they should include me in fucking everything they do because I bought them a house. And it's so crazy now when I think about it, and the freedom that I'm given by conceding that that's just not a thing at all, that I don't have expectations.
It's based on the same thing that if we buy ourselves a house, we're going to be better. If we buy ourselves another car, we're going to be better. It's the exact same thing in the other direction. And all we've done is turned it around and think because we're doing it for them, it isn't sick. It's the exact same thing that leads to that emptiness where enough is never enough. It's what addiction, it's the basis of addiction. And it's the same thinking in another direction. What I realized in my experience is that I was helping myself to the idea that I was a big help while I was not helping people.
Right. I've done this. I'm so fucking helpful. They should be so enamored of me.
So I'm trying to take credit for what I'm actually not doing, rather than take credit for what I'm doing by saying I'm not helping anybody. That's credit due because it's honest. I'm not helping any of these people. They're not getting better. I'm actually doing them a disservice. Service is not a disservice.
Are you enabling them?
Exactly. That's what the word is. And I would say that's the core of addiction, because if we get sober together, we probably get sicker together too. by the conspiracy and all that sort of thing that you talk about.
Yeah. It's
That
there.
collective consciousness seems to sort of lull us into this sense, well, if everybody else is doing it, it's the only thing I should do too. And well, we use everyone else's wrong to justify our own, and then uses everything everyone else do to justify we can't get better. We use them as excuses in both directions.
So crazy. I feel like it's wine and roses, like some of the problems of my acquaintances or friends or whatever. I don't concede to the fact. I mean, I think in my subconscious, I give them permission to go ahead and do things that are not in their best interest. And I go, well, if I love them enough, they'll get sober. Or if I love them enough, and of course it's unconditional, I should just love them, but I should also concede to the fact that there are in fact problems there. I shouldn't just mush over them because I love them enough. I mean, I can't fix it, and I don't want to enable it, but I also should recognize it.
Well, I would say that part of the same recognition in others is the part we get with the self we think is ours. When we start noticing that self, if I look at somebody else who's struggling and condemn them for it, I'm condemning them for the same thing I condemned myself to by thinking the reality of that self was true.
Oh, I think I am enabling them, because I think I am giving them permission in my psyche. I get it. Yeah, it's either enabling or concession, and I'm probably enabling.
Well, listen, finding that line is generally finding it where you are and not in advance or beyond. And noticing that, what I find is that I generally have this sort of insistence of what I'm doing, that I'm kind of amped up, I'm pushing. And when I feel that, I realize, no, I'm on a path where I think I'm trying to sell them something rather than just express or share something.
Yes, that's it. It's the sale thing. Yeah, that's it. It's not a neutral. That's exactly right. But at least I'm aware now. I'm very much more, my awareness is there, and I can concede to it. Just now, I just did.
Yeah, well, talking about it really helps. Again, my sense is communication between us, aside from the intimate nature of our own interactive telepathic connection, which I believe is always working and we're always aware of. We don't pay as much attention to it because we've been so preoccupied with thinking that thinking's our only source and what we think is happening is our only source, rather than begin to notice that we do have a very keen awareness of what's happening around us. And often walking into rooms, you can get a sense of things that are broader than you're thinking, because you're facing a room of people that whoever is there is generally inclusive of people you didn't expect there, or other people doing things you wouldn't expect of them. So it's an experience that can often be daunting because we're witnessing things we're not thinking would happen. And most of what we do with brains is try to predict what's going to happen next so that we can make decisions that move us forward and save us and secure us. And a lot of those decisions, if they're sick, are doing exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So in talking about it, the earlier point was that talking seems to be the thing we do best, rather than writing or reading or smoke signals or SOS. What do they call it? Those signals that the sailors, Morse code.
Morse code, yeah.
Talking seems to be the thing we do best and most. So if we can talk about it openly, you will have an experience of that awareness, having already engaged in it, better than if you're just doing it by yourself alone in that voice that you have. That awareness can be very profound, but the application of it in a conversation begins to actually exercise it and start to get some legs and some perspective and some place in the world, but with everybody else, not just you having it on your own. So my sense is that discussion, the discussion is really designed to do that. We're starting to actually do that. And it's taken some time to get to this point. So I'm looking forward to have it develop, because I think as new people come in who haven't been on for a while or have been away, they're going to see quickly that we're way down that road we thought we were stuck in and we thought we were unable to move from. which
And
I've heard a lot. A lot gets repeated. Why does it constantly get repeated? What's my sense is the reason it's repeated is because we haven't heard it yet.
And it's not judgmental. I feel like it's not, it's got legs now. I'm glad I expressed it, and I'm glad that we talked about it. And I don't feel bad about it. I don't feel like I'm judging myself or that I'm being judged. It's just got legs, and I'm kind of getting the cobwebs off of it. And I'm not, the shadows are going away. Things are dissolving. It's coming to light, and it's all good. And I'm grateful.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. You know what? Now that I took up everybody's time, I got to go jump in the shower because I'm getting taken to brunch in like 40 minutes and I have a 20-minute drive. So I love everybody.
Love you too. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you.
Okay, Jack.
That about it? Thank you very much, Santiago. It's good to see you. I'm glad you didn't have
Good to see
tennis
you.
for our sake.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, dear. Bye-bye.
Anthony, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you, young man. I'll talk to you during the week.